Hi, this is Ayanna Green, and today we're going to discuss Apple's Supplier Code of Conduct. Apple Code of Conduct outlines expectations of all its suppliers worldwide. The conduct outlines labor and human rights, health and safety, environmental protection, ethics, and management practices. For the purpose of this, we're going to touch on two of the most important, which will be labor and human rights and health and safety. Under labor and human rights, Apple believes all workers in our supply chain deserve a fair and ethical workplace. Workers must be treated with the utmost dignity and respect, and suppliers shall uphold the highest standard of human rights. Under labor and human rights, there's anti-discrimination, anti-harassment and abuse, prevention of involuntary labor and human trafficking, prevention of underage labor, juvenile worker protection, student worker protection, working hours, wages and benefits, freedom of association, and collective bargaining. Apple has made progress in the area of working hours by reducing hours worked in its factories. They now also disclose the names and locations of all its supplier factories in order to show transparency and dedication to labor rights. Reports show almost perfect compliance when it comes to freedom of association, which is the right to organize unions and bargain collectively. Apple joined Fair Labor Association and committed itself to abide by its standards. With this, they initiated the Fair and Labor Association investigations and agreed to stand by any findings and take immediate action. Under health and safety, you have occupational health, safety, and hazard prevention, emergency prevention, preparedness, and responsiveness, incident management, ergonomics, working conditions, health and safety communications, worker health and safety committee. Worker health, safety, and well-being is important to Apple, and they state the supplier shall provide and maintain a safe environment and integrated sound health and safety management practices into its business. Workers shall have the right to refuse any unsafe work and report unhealthy working conditions. And to show commitment to this, Apple has initiated a training academy for management personnel for all health and safety issues. They also now verify that all their suppliers are conduct free. Apple drives suppliers to train more than 3.8 million workers on their rights. All employees have the right to refuse work if they feel it is unsafe or a hazardous work condition. In a 2007 study, Apple was cited for health and safety violations in the area of ergonomics. A lot of them dealt with repetitive motion and employees not being trained properly. Suppliers also were cited for improperly installed emergency exit or lacking supply for first aid kits. In these areas, the audit also found that most health and safety violations came from inadequate written policies or missing training programs. They developed and implemented. Suppliers are required to develop, maintain, and implement environmental responsible business practices. All of these things are designed to establish supplier responsibility. These are basic expectations, but sometimes there's more guidance that is needed for the suppliers. So Apple is building a library of best practices and guidelines that outline specific implementation steps drawn from their experience in benchmarking with other companies. So far, they developed guidelines in areas such as dormitory conditions, medical tests, work rules for students, and non-discriminatory recruiting. They continue to hold their suppliers to a higher standard by aggressively auditing the suppliers and pursuing corrective actions. Apple has improved living and working conditions for tens of thousands of employees in their supply chain. They encourage the amount of progress for their teams. They're finding in facility and conduct to follow up on audits. With this, they are holding all of their suppliers to a higher standard. And by putting some of these practices By putting these things into practice, they help to pave the way for healthier working conditions and fair labor working conditions and things of that nature. So in their plan, they've included to double the number of facilities audited. They are going to double the number of Apple employees and supplier employees trained, and the expectations of the supplier code of conduct. Develop and distribute best practices for more topics covered by Apple supplier conduct. And going forward, they will provide updates of the progress. So all of this shows you that Apple's committed to making their employees happy, the suppliers happy, and they're also aware of society and the demands on fair labor. In making sure that their suppliers are know how serious they are in this, Apple has taken a strict stance to put suppliers that violate the code of conduct on a year probation. They issue corrective actions, and the suppliers are required to tell them what happened and give them a corrective measure for making sure it doesn't happen again. If the violations aren't corrected to Apple's liking, they can terminate their contract with the supplier and no longer use that supplier. So they're taking a hard stand, and they're letting the suppliers know that if you can't comply with the code of conduct, that we no longer need your service.